anyway.
No, no, it's better.
Here's the drawing, isn't
I know that.
yeah.
I'll be over there.
Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and to our esteemed guests, Chris Fogarty and his good lady wife, Mary Sullivan. I want to welcome all teachers of the launch of the book. But first things first, we're going to read the proclamation of Public Inheritance 1916. So, if everyone would mind standing up, please. Public Inheritance, the provisional government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generation from which she received her own tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizens' Army, having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by her gallant allies in Europe, but relying in first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished, except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right, and again asserting it in arms, in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and our lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to, and hereby claims, the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights, and equal opportunities for all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally, and of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which has divided the minority from the majority of the past. Until our arms have brought about the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all the men and women, the provisional government hereby constituted will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon you, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or opinion. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by its readiness of its children, sacrifice itself for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McClindy, Mark McDonald, P.H. Pearce, Amy Stamp, James Conley, and Joseph Conley. Thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the poet.
It's kind of hard to know where to start. This talk is about an event, a crime that was perpetrated starting 170 years ago. A crime that is covered up to this day. After doing my grandfather's biography, or while doing my grandfather's biography, studying at the Public Record Office at the time in Kew, outside London, or in London, I found that the regiment that he joined when he was 18 years of age had removed the food from South County Galway that was 40th Regiment of Foot had removed the food from South County, Galway, while he was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of age, 10 years of age. I was shocked, because in the schools I had attended in the United States and in Ireland, we'd been taught about a famine. It wasn't called so much a potato famine earlier on. That's a new additional lie that's been added as the years have gone by. But we were taught about the famine. And as a little aside on that matter, some of my ex-schoolmates in Castlereagh, County Roscommon, under pressure from me to receive a memorial from my wife and me over one of the 4 mass graves in Castlereagh from those years, learned to be afraid. They became afraid to be associated with this. And one of them took my pamphlet at the time, which is now a book, to the brother Enda, a Marit's brother, who had taught us all in Castlereagh, County Roscommon, and said, we're looking for errors in this. We'll be back in 2 weeks to find out where Fogarty has committed errors. They were looking for an excuse to not participate, have anything to do with this monument in our town of Castlereagh. So 2 weeks later, they went back, and Brother Enda said, I'm fairly informed on this subject, and I believe that this is all true. And one of them had the cheek at the time to say, how can you say that this is true when it contradicts everything you taught us in school about the famine? And to Brother Enda's eternal shame, and to that of the Irish government, Brother Enda said, I had no choice. I had to teach the curriculum as provided to me by the government. So there he admitted, after a 15-year teaching career, Maris brother Enda, born near Glasson, Westmeath, north of Athlone, admitted lying to his students about a genocide his whole teaching career. So that's sort of the background. We now find that all of Irish academia is committed to that same big lie. And these are adults now. These are adults who one would think should have some courage. And one would think that Ireland might be freer today than it was in the late 1940s. But I know of no exception among Irish academia today, and I want to learn of exceptions. I want to learn of people who respect the truth and who teach history. So in any event, I was prompted to do a pamphlet first, and then went back in 1995 or 6 when the likes of Senator Avril Doyle was coming out to the States to promote the potato famine. And later that was made electronic on www.irishholocaust.org. And then finally, when that website failed to silence the famine history fabricators, those who lie consistently about history, when that website failed to shame them into silence, I then wrote this book. And I hope that it will make a difference. I believe it will. It is far more detailed. In fact, I think one could call it comprehensive. It is far more detailed than the irishholocaust.org that you can find and the earlier pamphlet. And what's more, it also corrects an error in irishholocaust.org, in that in irishholocaust.org I used the word combination miscounted and other things, but I came up with 75 British regiments that removed Ireland's food. It was 67 British regiments that removed Ireland's food, and those 67 regiments were more than half of the British Empire Army at the time. The British Empire Army in those years totaled 130 regiments. 67 of those regiments removed the food from Ireland at gunpoint. Now, for years, the Irish academic historians have denied that any food left Ireland at all in those years. Christine Keneally, in a book review she did of Cormac O'Grada's The Great Famine, I believe he called it, said that his book would go a long way toward ending the myths passed down glibly from generation to generation in Ireland about callous landlords and food being shipped while the people starved. And she denied that any food at all left Ireland in those years. Under pressure, I believe, from people who carried my pamphlets to her book events along the east coast of Boston, New York, down Baltimore, along the east coast of the States, her next book not alone refuted all her previous work, but she said that she wrote that 4,000 shiploads of Irish grain alone sailed into Liverpool alone in 1847 alone, a complete reversal of her previous position. And as an academic historian, you think there might be some repercussions to that. She suffered no negative consequences. And so her position was that because she now acknowledged that food was leaving Ireland while the people were starving, a brand new lie was created by her and the rest of Irish academia that it was the rich Irish starving the poor Irish. So that was a brand new lie that started about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. Brand new lie. The rich Irish starving the poor Irish. Well, it was rich people in Ireland, indeed, who were participating in that, but they were the landlords. And if people say, well, where are those landlords today? Well, they were all repatriated to England by the British government in between 1900 and 1910. They're essentially all gone. I was raised on a farm that was divided up out of Lord Will's Sanford estate. And across the country, we know it's the same thing happened. And my father was paying rent on that land the same way the earlier people had paid rent to the landlord. But what happened is that when the British government repatriated all of its Irish landlords in the face of international condemnation because of what they had been doing here along with the army, they forced the recipients of the land, whose ancestors had never sold it, they forced those recipients to pay rent, to amortize the sums, the above market sums that had been given to those landlords. They were paid more than the market price at the time because there was pressure, they were under pressure from the tillers of the soil. So the British government paid them above market prices and then amortized that amount that had been paid to the landlords and extracted it from the recipients of that land. So my father, along with all of his neighbors in County and North County Galway that I personally know, were paying rent in addition to twice yearly rates on that land. And that land, those payments went to amortize the amounts that had been given to the landlords until De Valera, sometime in the 1930s, stopped forwarding that to the British government, started using it for Irish purposes, for which the British government responded by embargoing all Irish imports into Britain. That caused the price of cattle to jump. So that's kind of where we are. To me, the most shocking feature of the crime itself is that it is the efforts and time and treasure spent on denying it today. That's the shocking thing. I know of no genocide in history that is so denied, so vociferously denied in every possible way. And Ireland's academia is totally committed to the cover-up. So the notion that you have an academia that is committed to lying about a historic event, it shocks me, and they're doing that today. Once my pamphlet was distributed around Chicago, the Irish Consul General gave a series of talks around the city, including in people's houses, to promote the notion of the famine. Now it's important, this does not set well with Irish Americans, because the word famine implies that the people fell into a lethal trap of their own making, that they grew only one failure-prone crop. And in fact, Cecil William Smith, in her otherwise meritorious work, she claimed that there was nothing green from Cape Clear to Malin-Head. The whole island had gone brown. A shocking falsehood for a woman whose the rest of the book was pretty well done. So we have this lie ongoing, and we have work to do, all of us. This is not the work of one person or 15 people. It should be the work of human beings all over the world. Not alone the Irish, but everyone. We should expose genocide in order to preclude more genocides. And Mary and I are acting on principle. We are working against the American genocides in Iraq. In fact, all over the world today. It is shocking what has happened. The United States government has become the British government of 150 years ago. So we've been working hard at it and have paid a bit of a price. But how it's going to work out, we don't know. But a past genocide, one that is undeniable, we should, all human beings everywhere should get behind it and get the truth out about it. In order to preclude the notion to governments everywhere that they can commit genocide and get away with it. We all remember perhaps Hitler saying about 1937 or 38, who remembers Armenia, when some of his advisors warned him that he wouldn't get away with the crimes he was about to perpetrate. Who remembers Armenia? Well, the same can be said about Ireland. Who remembers Ireland? And we must find out the truth about these genocides in order to preclude future ones. That's about my general set of ideas. If anyone maybe has some questions, or particularly I would invite questions that would have to do with the authenticity of the work. I might just mention here one thing. My grandfather's serving with the British Army has always been an embarrassment, well, hasn't always, it became an embarrassment to me after I learned what the British Army had been doing everywhere. So he joined the British Army again when he was 18 years of age, and he did against the Maoris in New Zealand, against the original people, the original Australians, and the people in India, what those same regiments had done to his own people. He was born in the shadow of landlord Ashbrook's gallows, on Gallows Hill outside Durrow, where his previous sister was also born in that shelter, temporary shelter, after his parents and the two older children were evicted from their farm in Ballykeely, Durrow, County Leash. So they lived there in a temporary, at the will of the Lord, the way they evicted them, Lord Ashbrook, they lived there at his will until they made it down the hill and into a house on Chapel Street in Durrow. And it was from there that when he turned 18, that my grandfather joined the British Army. So I've learned to be ashamed, but I just heard from Mary Dolan tonight that maybe my grandfather's shame is redeemed by what it has brought out here and brought out in the book. Because the book could not have been written had I not been in London doing research on my grandfather's life. I published something that was good for the family, Kieran Fogarty, 1839, 1927, His Life and Times, and it tells the story. And it's there that I became ashamed of what the British Army has done everywhere and his role in those crimes.
Yes, along your initial journey to discover the truth, I can only imagine, in my perception and question, how did you had to be on the ground asking these questions, am I right?
Yes.
People, going from place to place, cross-referencing dates and time and facts and all that. How long did all of that take, and what obstacles did you meet in the way?
It's tough to know. I started learning in 1946 when my mother would speak in lowered or tender tones about Connolly's gardenings across the Cashatoga River in the bog, where local people up in the good land behind their house were evicted in the 1879-1880 land war and evictions at that time. But it didn't register. Later, Cecil William Smith's book, The Great Hunger, 1845-1850, she exposed 13 British regiments that removed the food from different parts of Ireland. And there was combat in getting the food out of Ireland by those 13 regiments. But she buried those facts in so many other falsehoods, including one that said that the people of Ireland starved because Irish women forgot how to cook anything but potatoes. Bizarre. And she went on to say that nothing grew from Cape Clear to Midden Head. And she also wrote that, you'll see it in the book, that nothing but potatoes were grown in Sligo and Mayo. And it just happens, you'll see it in the book, that there are more grain kilns and grain mills in Sligo and Mayo than most of the other counties of Ireland. So that she wrote completely falsified history. The result of her work is that I maintained the word famine from then on until London, until I learned the complete truth in the London Public Records Office. The British owned the Army Records. And then from there, Mary and I then went to the local library in Chicago, where there's a complete set of ordnance surveying maps, and we looked over them page by page of all 36 or 37 volumes, there's two from Newry, two from Cork, two from Galway, two from Mayo. And we found every grain kill and every grain mill in the country. And they were still operating in around North County Galway in my time there. I worked in the kilns, and my uncle carried the grain from the dried in the mill, in the kill over to the mill, there were mills working all around us. Those same mills are on the ordnance survey map were still operating in the mid 1945s, 1940s. So the learning was slow. I continued to use the word famine until essentially I decided this book had to be written. And you can, from now on, or starting sometime around now historically, you will know whether a person is either deceived or an accomplice in a lie by whether they use the word famine or not. Famine is the cover-up word for one of history's greatest crimes. So anyone who uses the word famine, they peg themselves. They're either deceivers or they are disinformed. Once they get this information, it is inescapable.
Yeah, sure. I suppose you can ask the question, sorry, indigenous descendants of the Celtic tribes, they could only grow food.
That's a lot of questions. That's a lot we're all taught in school.
And the present day, Chris, how they try to cover this up and how much money's thrown into high taxes, Holocaust here. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, this group here today and we're all in the same boat. The truth and Irish sovereignty, and it all ties in together, is being promoted by volunteers who will remain destitute as a consequence, while those who promote the lie are getting paid out of taxes that we pay. So the liars are funded, and the truth tellers are paying it for it out of their own pockets. That's the way it is.
Yes, I just want to ask a question. What were the main benefits to the British of a reduced Irish population?
Say it again, please.
What were the main benefits to the British at a time of a reduced Irish population?
That's a matter of speculation, and I try to avoid speculation, but one can sort of guess. And above all, they benefited commercially at the time by removing all the food. And then there are many who think that they would like to have replaced the Irish people as a whole, to completely wipe them out and replanted the country. That's a matter of opinion, and I don't engage in a whole lot of opinion.
Building up to the point as well.
Indeed. Yes, these have gone on and on for years. Maybe it's worth mentioning here that the same people who are involved in this, in the big lie, tend to also be in favor of the new U.S. empire and the U.S.-UK empire. The crimes perpetrated supposedly since 9/11, 2001, are said to be caused by that event, 2001, 9/11. But in fact, the record is quite clear. They were planned well before that by a small group of people that call themselves the neoconservatives. They used to be Marxist-Leninists, for some reason became neoconservatives. And the crimes are now known. Anyone who cares can find the number of people who were murdered in those countries. And we know the military units who went there and bombed them or droned them or whatever they did. But those crimes needed some preliminary crimes. And this might shock you, and I hope it's not so far out that it will cast doubt upon the spirit of the book here. But it is a fact that the crimes perpetrated against Mary and me in Chicago by the FBI, motivated by MI5, was followed up when the same FBI agent who framed me for a triple murder of people I'd never known, and then later locked Mary and me up, along with two others, in the federal lockup in Chicago and tried to imprison us for the rest of our lives based upon, which we proved 15 months later in federal court, was an audio tape that the FBI themselves had criminally fabricated. The chief FBI agent who committed those crimes was never prosecuted for those crimes, but MI5 sent him to Ireland in late 1993 or early 1994, where he remained along with lifelong criminal David Rupert. And when I say lifelong criminal, I'm referring to a New York State Police affidavit attesting that David Rupert is a lifelong criminal. So those two lived in Ireland from late 1993, early 1994, until the evening of August 15, 1998, upon mission accomplished. And mission accomplished was the bombing of Omagh. And the bombing of Omagh was required by these neocons, along with MI5 and the FBI, to drive home the Good Friday Agreement to free up the British Army to be used in the new wars against Islam. That last part might seem to be strange speculation, and Mary and I, we didn't know why these crimes were perpetrated. We didn't know why the FBI were involved in the bombing, of the turning of an IRA bomb into an atrocity, let us say. It would seem to have been a Republican bomb, but it was turned into an atrocity by MI5 with the FBI. These were necessary steps to drive home the Good Friday Agreement, to free up the British Army, in order to have what the neocons called the international community behind their crimes. The international community was not much more than the United States military and the British military. That constituted largely what's called the international community. We would not know that this was a fact until the book Voices from the Grave, that was written some 3 years ago, in which the people who were interviewing for the Boston College papers interviewed Dorothy Hughes for the Republicans on one side, this is just one part, and David Irvine, the head of the UVS, Ulster Volunteer Force, on the other. Both described their deeds. But David Irvine is taped stating, when I was brought to the White House, and I must say, as a murderer of many, as the lead murderer of hundreds of people, he was brought in triumph to the White House. But while at the White House, David Irvine accused the State Department, the U.S. government, of siding with what he called the provost. But the State Department, head of the Britain desk, said, on the contrary, the IRA don't have Buccaneer bombers. This is, by the way, on page 450 of Voices from the Grave. The IRA don't have Buccaneer bombers. They don't have aircraft carriers. And we, the United States government, must sew up the British exchequer so we can engage in our upcoming wars. David Irvine said, and we all looked at him, the head of the desk of the State Department, and that person said, Islamic fundamentalism. To which David Irvine followed up with, that was in 1994, and I was not alone, there are other witnesses. So all of these crimes, including the ones that you see, they all tie in to a historic series of massive crimes. And I'm hoping that we will all somehow, mankind will save itself, because I believe that mankind is doomed, living under people, so-called leaders like this, who believe that you can bomb your way to peace, bomb your way to international success. So that's what we're faced with today. Yes, sir.
Just in relation to the 1845 disaster, so-called from previous to that.
Previous to what now, please?
Previous to that particular date, 1845.
Yes.
The British used every conceivable means to destroy the Irish race. They had us sent out to the colonies. They had us exiled. They had us executed. They done what tried to do away with our religion. They introduced charter schools here to convert our people. The quid pro quo was everything had to be in the words of English, plus the fact that everybody had to become Protestants.
All
The
that-
1845 famine was the greatest natural disaster that aided and abetted England's subtle act of genocide on the people of Ireland.
Mind you, I was in, Mary and I were at the Strokestown so-called Irish Famine Museum 20 years ago. And as you enter the lobby of this big house, and by the way, instead of finding out which regiment starved your people, if you're an American tourist trying to get information, you'll be guided into admiring the landlord's exquisite taste in furniture and architecture. That's the extent of their stuff. But I've lost the train of my thought now. Oh, yeah, thank you very much, Mary. Yeah. On the wall of that lobby, there is some foreign country, it must be China, gauging by the coolie hats, so-called coolie conical hats of the people work in the field. And on it in print is that Ireland is one of the few nations on earth that had committed national suicide by growing only one failure-prone crop. That was one lie. We wouldn't go in, we wouldn't go past that. But then there was a leaflet handed to us, a pamphlet, written by then President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, in which she referred to the so-called famine as Ireland's greatest natural catastrophe. And by the way, once you read the book and assimilate it, you will never use that statement again, and you won't use famine again either. Yes?
Do you think there is a difference between the folk memory and the narrative of academia? Because I suspect the people, a lot of the ordinary people weren't as fooled by the official narrative as the ruling class would like to believe. John Mitchell, and let me know we can I understand your point with using the word famine. John Mitchell said, after all, God may have sent the light, but it was England created the famine. And the same house you're talking about, Strokestown House, just before the treaty, before the ceasefire in 1921, the local IRA took the place over and put the storage about the front door and shot the peasants on the lawn. The peasants, they shot the peasants on the lawn explicitly, not to shoot him, but to tell him that the days would change. That was the local IRA, who were the local peasants of the time, who were the tenants of the Hagnam Mahans, the landlord of the Strokestown. I know that firsthand because it's like yourself, relatives of Scotland. So the people weren't as possibly as misled as the ruling class has. And I think obviously what your book is restoring a lot of the correct narrative. But we could say that the people were not as fooled as
They had no. In fact, when I was going to school in Castlereagh in 1940 or 1950, we would hear from the local people. We all knew what the local situation was. But when it came to Irish history, if one of us had written onto a test sheet what we knew, we would get a failing grade. So those who later became teachers of history were those who had regurgitated the lies back onto the test sheets. They then became the professors of history. Very sad. So the people knew very well. They knew well. They wouldn't know island-wide, but they would know about their own community. And a little background regarding the Pakenham Mahon estate, and that was the one adjoining that of the Wills Sanford estate. General Pakenham led the British battle against New Orleans, where he died in 1814. You know the song, Down the Mississippi Below. That was General Pakenham who led that attack, and he died there. And General Ross, another British Army general, just like Pakenham, from Ross Trevor, he led the attack on Fort Henry in Baltimore, for which the Star-Spangled Banner came into being. So the notion that these were the rich Irish starving the poor Irish, they were the rich British landlords in Ireland who, with the British Army, starved people. And what's more, it was one of the greatest robberies in history. You can look at these estates today, and a number of the towns at least the ones that I know of in the west of Ireland, grew up outside the gates of the domain, because the people living in the domain had the spending of all the production of the people for miles around. Whatever, all the work they did was grabbed by the landlords on the basis that it was grown on their land. They had a right to it. It was their property. And that it was, again, the greatest robbery in history. I went across was perpetrated with the guns of the British Army.
Chris, what was the role of the Roman Catholic Church in the respect of the food removal between 1845, and was there a deal struck with the Crown and the Roman Catholic Church?
It wasn't total, but almost all of Ireland's bishops, with a couple of exceptions, Bishop Croke and Bishop McHale, for which we have Croke Park and McHale Park in Castlebar. The rest of them were essentially traitors to their country. I wish, as a Catholic, I wish this were not true, but true it is. I'm under pressure from some men in Baltimore who want me to go softer and rewrite this softer on the church. And I told them, I want the church to look as good as, I want all churches to look as good as possible, but I won't falsify history to make them look good, and that's what they're asking me to do.
Actually, in the fields, in that famous line, no priest ever starved in the famine.
Well, in just months prior to 1845, potato crop failure, and I don't like to talk about potatoes because it tends to shift the image, but the British government in London allocated in upcoming days, when the food of Ireland would be made scarce by their army, they made a law that would have them separate rations out of what they were removing from the land in Ireland for the hierarchy. And the entire priesthood down to, but not including the level of curate, the lowest level of priest. But the bishops demurred. They wouldn't go along with that until that law included food for all priests. And then the bishops, from then on, they preached God's will off the altars of Ireland.
Just on that, Chris, sorry, not to extend, do you have any information on how many churches were actually established around that time? I would imagine that, the churches...
Catholic churches?
Yeah.
That's a good question. You see, they were allowed to exist starting in 1829, 1828, 1829. But prior to that, ever since Cromwell, they had been wiped out and not permitted. So it's just a rare exception. But the laws prohibited Catholic churches in Ireland those years, so it wasn't always enforced. But you're right in pointing out that during the starvation, for example, the Cathedral of Killarney was built in the midst of it. And that was true of a number of churches. So the church went ahead with building at a time when the people were starving. Not I think, in a total building campaign, but there were examples of that.
There's a number of issues I wanted to raise. So I'm sorry for being late. I got the wrong time for this event altogether. But one, I haven't heard any mention specifically of the legislative acts by the British Parliament that brought about the Holocaust. And that was the penal code that was imposed on Ireland and Ireland alone. And the way it was designed to take people off the land. And sort of kind of an answer to an earlier question, to put the whole Irish problem in context. After the Reformation, whatever chance Ireland ever had of being an independent nation perished at the Reformation. Because England went Church of England, became Anglican, we remained Catholic, we automatically allied ourselves with Southern Europe, Italy, Spain and France. Consequently, because Britain could not defend their own coastline, and still indeed can't, that's why she invented her navy, and she met her enemies at sea and defeated them. Because she couldn't, we became the Achilles heel of the British Empire. And the only way she could defend her own land was to subjugate ours. And there's absolutely no excuse for that. That's what you done. And as one of many means of depleting the population, the less people, the less agrarian activity, the less likelihood of revolt. And after the Treaty of Limerick, William of Orange wasn't particularly enthused by having to look after Ireland. He left it in the hands of the landed gentry, the people that had been put there from the previous plantations. And he left it in their hands to rule it as the Unionists ruled the 6 counties of this country. And they could do what they liked. That is why, when they tried to bring food into Ireland to feed the starving population, you had the likes, and everyone knows the song, where he stole Trevelyan's corn. So Charles Trevelyan could stand up in Westminster and say nothing should interfere with free trade, not even the death of a nation. And that was legislative genocide on the Irish people.
You shouldn't be promoting their lie.
I'm not promoting their lie.
It wasn't free trade.
Of course it wasn't free trade.
What you just said.
No, but the problem, it was never trade anyway, because the Irish peasant had no control over the produce he was producing. They was going to pay rent and to fill the likes of Strokestown House with all its beautiful furniture. And in actual fact, Strokestown House was invented, if you like. The whole Strokestown concept was invented. Bellingare was the true area of commerce under the O'Connor chieftainship. And he was the last, he had his lands confiscated. And the Clonallis House was the seat of the O'Connor family.
Part of the big lie today has it that this was laissez-faire. And it's not laissez-faire when you use more than half of your empire army to perpetrate something. That's not laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is allowing the marketplace to act out itself. And if the marketplace had acted out in those years, those landlords would have lost their land, and it would have come back to those who were tilling the soil. So laissez-faire is one more of those huge lies that is used by our enemies. It was not and by the way, laissez-faire alone is not such a great thing, but it's better than compulsion. And they used the army, they used more than half of the British army to remove Ireland's food.
They did, and they used the legislative power of the penal code.
Sure.
The right of what's the word, inheritance and everything was changed to depopulate Ireland.
I must say, the worst of the penal era was ending before the army came in and removed the food. But the book does cover all that. In fact, I've been the only negative review I've had of the book, not in print but in personally, is that it's too large, that it contains too much of the history of British depredations in Ireland. That I should write another book that's about the starvation alone. But I wanted to put into the context that you're bringing up. I think that's it's fair to present that crime within a criminal context that went on for centuries. And that's what the book does.
Chris, first of all, thanks for the work I have done. It's quite so, and I'm an academic. I lecture in culinary arts, so I'm going to be doing research on this. So first of all, thank you. In relation to, I think what a lot of people don't realise is how much of our nationhood has actually been stolen. Because culinary identity is a big part of who any nation is, or any peoples are. Can you speak a little bit of maybe what you came across from the richness of our land, and our Irishness, or our Celticness before this Holocaust, and also maybe make a comparison with the beneficiaries? If you came across records, for example, of what the soldiers were actually eating as part of their regiments, because I think that might help focus people about the richness of the cuisine and what was actually taken away from us. Because here we are all these years on, our cuisine is almost schizophrenic as a nation. We don't actually know what truly Irish food is. So
we can only I can only speculate, but I don't have all the information. And but we know that there was high art in Ireland, as well as essentially grain and cattle. Potatoes are brought in supposedly by Sir Walter Raleigh. It was more likely to come in via Spain, found in the Andes in South America. But the Irish were self-sufficient. One of the things I use to measure some of the damage done is the Basilica of Ballintubber, County Mayo, where you see, I think, the last of true Irish exuberance, confidence in their art. Starting upon the arrival in 1170, I think the loss of confidence, the destruction of the people did not occur immediately, but it went down into a terrible decline, so that they became, their songs in Ireland today are derivative. They're somebody else's hopes and loves and everything. They're not Irish hopes and loves. People singing about the U.S. South sing without ever leaving Ireland, sing with the Southern U.S. accent. It's really crazy. So there's a lot to be done here to restore what should be here, and I have no doubt that the Irish people will do it. I must say that a few people I've got to know in recent years, Alan McCartney for a long time, but also Billy Maguire, who's asking politicians, what is the founding date of our nation? And they don't know. And I think that's a crucial thing to bring out. January 21st, 1919, based upon the election, island-wide landslide of 1918. Once that's brought out, I think things will start to happen. And then I had a conversation today with Richard Beall, another capable spokesperson. And I don't see how the big lie can prosper, how it can continue, when the facts are so abundantly clear. All it takes is getting the word out. Now, I know there's a problem here with the news media. The news media is utterly corrupt, just like academia. It's completely corrupt. And so the people will have to get control of it. I don't know how that can be done, except by people like yourselves and ourselves doing the best we can.
It won't work, because at this point in time, you can sit in any room in any house in this city with a number of people. You have people who have been in the civil service, people who are connected in one way or another to a profession. Bring up a subject such as this, and immediately they want to change the subject. Why? Because it affects their future prospects in the civil service, in the public service, in their particular profession. They don't want to know. They want to softly approach. And the problem with Ireland is we've been infected with a Westbrook virus here. It comes in through social media, it comes in through soccer, it comes in through everything, and we can do nothing about it. And the only way to do it nearly is to do what the Hungarians do, is nearly build a bloody wall around. And it's a battle that really can't be won.
There's a minor battle going on these very days. A priest born in Chicago of Irish immigrant parents, now an old man. When he was younger, he established a parish in Venice, Florida. After becoming familiar with my work, he decided he would put up a memorial over the Holocaust mass grave. By the way, when you all have read this book, if you cease using the word famine, which supports the big lie, you will start to have a useful effect. And so he's in contact with where his mother was born in northwest Mayo. And he has contacted his cousin, with whom he has visited on occasion, and the local monument maker to do that monument. And he wasn't getting any reply from them. This is all happening this is going on now. It's been going on for the last few months. So finally, after pushing hard and getting his cousin wrote back to him, or called him, and said the parish priest says that go ahead if you must with the memorial, but carve famine into that stone. Do not use any other word but famine. So that would really support the big lie again. So the priest in Florida is now going head to head with the priest in northwest Mayo, and I believe the truth will win. That's what I expect, because I think the truth tends to win in almost all situations, unless, well, you know about all the reasons why it won't.
Yeah, but you've also the situation that it's been lack of historical knowledge has been stifled by removing the likes of history and history related subjects out of the education.